The morning sun cast long shadows across the glass towers of New Geneva as Ambassador Claire Rodriguez walked into her office on the 42nd floor. She had been Earth's primary diplomatic representative for 3 years now, handling trade, agreements, and cultural exchanges with the dozen alien species humanity had encountered since reaching the stars. Today felt like any other day until her communication console lit up with an incoming transmission marked with the golden seal of the Galaxy Council. Claire had heard stories about the Galaxy Council, but had never received direct contact from them. The Council was supposedly made up of 12 powerful alien races that had been running things in this part of the galaxy for thousands of years. Every species that ventured into space eventually received a visit from them and most quickly learned to follow their rules about where ships could go, what worlds could be colonized, and how much tribute needed to be paid for the privilege of existing among the stars. The holographic projector activated and a tall crystalline being materialized in front of her desk. Its body looked like living diamond with faceted surfaces that caught and reflected light in mesmerizing patterns. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes mixed with the grinding of stone. "I am Vex Kohler, speaking for the Galaxy Council. You are the human diplomatic representative, correct?" The being's question carried an undertone that suggested Claire should feel honored by this attention. "Yes, I'm Ambassador Rodriguez. How can I help you today?" Claire kept her voice polite but not overly deferential. She had dealt with enough alien dignitaries to know that showing too much excitement or fear usually led to poor negotiations. "Your species has been expanding rapidly through this sector without proper authorization. Human vessels have been detected in 17 systems that require council permits for entry. Additionally, your people have established mining operations and colonies on 6 worlds without filing the appropriate documentation or paying the required fees." Claire pulled up her star charts on her desk display. The systems Vex Kohler mentioned were all within what Earth considered its natural expansion zone, areas where human ships had been operating for over 2 years without encountering any other intelligent life or posted restrictions. "I'm sorry, but we weren't aware these systems were restricted. We didn't encounter any warning beacons or border markers when our ships arrived." "Are you saying these areas belong to Council member species?" The crystalline being's facets shifted color slightly, which Claire's cultural training suggested might indicate irritation. "Ownership is irrelevant. The Council maintains order throughout this galactic region. All expansion by younger species must be approved and regulated to prevent conflicts and maintain stability." "I see. Well, what exactly are you asking us to do?" Vex Kohler's form brightened as if pleased that Claire was finally asking the right questions. "First, all human settlements in the 17 restricted systems must be abandoned within 30 of your planet's rotational periods. Second, your species will pay tribute equivalent to 12 million standard galactic credits for the unauthorized use of Council-protected space. Third, all human military vessels will be restricted to your home system until proper expansion permits can be reviewed and approved, a process that typically requires several of your years." Claire blinked slowly, trying to process what she was hearing. The alien was essentially demanding that humanity abandon colonies where millions of people now lived, pay an enormous fine for the crime of exploring empty space, and lock themselves into their home system indefinitely. "And if we don't agree to these terms? Then the Council will implement corrective measures. Your species will learn the same lesson that 47 others have learned over the millennia. Order must be maintained." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Claire staring at empty air where the hologram had been. She immediately placed a priority call to President Jake Morrison on Earth. 2 hours later, Claire found herself in a virtual meeting room with the planet's top leadership. President Morrison sat at the head of the table, his weathered face showing the strain of leading humanity through its first decades as a spacefaring civilization. Defense Secretary Lisa Park occupied the seat to his right, her military bearing evident even through the holographic projection. Dr. Tony Wells, the president's science advisor, had joined from his laboratory on Luna, his wild gray hair suggesting he had been pulled away from important work. So let me make sure I understand this correctly, President Morrison said after Claire finished her briefing. These aliens want us to abandon our colonies, pay them 12 million credits, and lock ourselves in our home system, all because they say they're in charge of this part of the galaxy? That's correct, Mr. President, the being I spoke with. Vex Kohler suggested that 47 other species have already learned to comply with Council demands. Defense Secretary Park leaned forward. What kind of enforcement capability are we looking at? Do we have any intelligence on Council military strength? Dr. Wells cleared his throat. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected some unusual energy signatures in the past few months, but nothing that suggested organized fleets. However, any species that has maintained galactic dominance for thousands of years presumably has significant technological advantages. President Morrison drummed his fingers on the table, a habit Claire had observed during previous difficult decisions. Lisa, what's your assessment of our ability to defend our colonies if this council decides to take action? Honestly, sir, it's hard to say without knowing what we're facing. Our colony defense forces are designed to handle pirates and equipment. Failures, not advanced alien military technology. But our people aren't going to abandon their homes without a fight, regardless of what some galactic government says. Tony, any thoughts on why this council is making demands now? We've been expanding for years without hearing from them. The science advisor adjusted his glasses. My guess would be that we've reached some kind of threshold that triggered their attention. Either we've grown large enough to be considered a potential threat, or we've moved into space they consider particularly important. It's also possible that other species have complained about human expansion. President Morrison stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. After several minutes of silence, he turned back to the group. Here's what bothers me about this whole situation. This council shows up after we've already established ourselves, demands we give up everything we've worked for, and expects us to just say yes because they claim to be in charge. But they haven't shown us any legal authority, any treaties we supposedly violated, or any evidence that the space we're using actually belongs to anyone else. Claire nodded. The crystalline being seemed surprised that I asked questions instead of immediately agreeing to their demands. That tells us something important about how this usually works. Other species probably get scared and comply before thinking things through. President Morrison returned to his seat. Lisa, I want you to put our defense forces on alert, but don't take any aggressive actions. Tony, I need you to analyze everything we know about this Galaxy Council and try to figure out what kind of technology they might have. What should I tell them when they contact us again? Claire asked. President Morrison smiled, and Claire recognized the expression from news coverage of difficult international negotiations. It was the smile of someone who had no intention of backing down. Tell them we appreciate their concerns, but we respectfully decline their demands. If they want to discuss mutual cooperation or trade agreements, we're happy to talk. But we're not abandoning our colonies or paying tribute for the right to exist in space. Dr. Wells looked concerned. Mr. President, are you sure that's wise? If this council has been maintaining order for thousands of years, they must have substantial power. Maybe they do, Tony, but maybe their power depends on other species being afraid of them. Either way, we're not going to find out by rolling over and playing dead the moment someone makes threats. Defense Secretary Park grinned. I like it. We've never been good at taking orders from people who haven't earned the right to give them. Claire felt a mixture of excitement and terror at the president's decision. Should I schedule a formal response? No need for formalities. Just send them a simple message, thanks but no thanks. We'll continue operating as we have been, and if they want to discuss anything further, they know where to find us. As the meeting ended and the holograms faded, Claire found herself alone with the weight of humanity's first major galactic diplomatic crisis. In a few hours, she would send a message that would either establish humanity as an independent force in the galaxy or potentially trigger a war with beings whose power she couldn't even imagine. But as she prepared the transmission, Claire realized she felt oddly calm about the whole situation. Humans had been dealing with bullies for their entire history. And the basic principle remained the same, whether the bully was a schoolyard tough or a crystalline alien claiming galactic authority. Sometimes you had to stand up and see what happened next. 3 weeks had passed since Ambassador Claire Rodriguez sent humanity's polite refusal to the Galaxy Council, and life across human space continued exactly as it had before. Construction crews on Mars finished the new atmospheric processing plant ahead of schedule. The colony shipbuilders on Europa launched another vessel toward the Kepler system. Farmers on New Dakota harvested their third successful crop of Earth wheat in alien soil. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Defiant, watching her crew run through their morning training exercises. The ship floated in space near the edge of the Sol system, part of the routine patrol that had been protecting human shipping lanes for the past 5 years. Kate had been expecting some kind of response from this Galaxy Council, but so far the only unusual thing had been the complete lack of unusual things. Lieutenant Ben Carter looked up from his communications station with a puzzled expression. "Admiral, I'm picking up some massive energy signatures approaching from the direction of Alpha Centauri. Whatever's coming, it's big." Kate walked over to the main display screen as the sensors painted a picture of what was heading their way. 12 enormous vessels, each one easily 3 times the size of the Defiance, were approaching in perfect formation. Their hulls seemed to be made of some kind of metal that shifted colors like oil on water, and energy readings suggested power sources far beyond anything humanity had developed. "Well, that's impressive," Kate said, settling back into her captain's chair. "Ben, send a standard greeting and ask them to state their business in human space." The response came immediately, broadcast on all frequencies in perfect English. "Human vessels, you are in the presence of the Galaxy Council Enforcement Fleet. Your species has ignored lawful directives and continued unauthorized expansion. You will stand down immediately and prepare to receive further instructions." Kate looked around at her bridge crew, noting that none of them seemed particularly worried by the announcement. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez was still focused on optimizing the ship's power systems. Navigator Amy Park continued plotting courses for the next patrol sweep. Weapons Officer Joe Miller was eating a sandwich while monitoring his displays. "Ben, respond with our standard diplomatic message. Tell them we're happy to discuss any concerns they might have through proper channels, but we're going to continue our regular operations." Lieutenant Carter nodded and sent the message. The alien fleet responded by moving closer and arranging themselves in what was clearly meant to be an intimidating attack formation. Energy weapons powered up, casting an eerie glow across their hulls. The lead ship began broadcasting warnings about the consequences of defying Council authority. Kate activated the ship's internal communication system. "All hands, this is the Admiral. We have some visitors who seem to want to impress us with a light show. Continue normal operations and let me know if anything actually interesting happens." The alien fleet maintained their threatening posture for the next 6 hours. They broadcast increasingly stern warnings about human stubbornness and the price of defying galactic order. They performed complicated maneuvers clearly designed to demonstrate their superior technology and firepower. They even projected holographic displays showing the destruction of other worlds that had dared to resist Council authority. Kate spent most of this time catching up on paperwork and having lunch with her senior officers. The alien fleet's attempts at psychological warfare were certainly well produced, but they reminded her of her grandfather's stories about playground bullies, who made a lot of noise but rarely followed through on their threats. Meanwhile, on Earth, ordinary life continued with barely a pause. Factory worker Sam Cooper reported to his job at the Colonial Shipyard in Detroit, where he was helping build humanity's newest deep space exploration vessel. The news feeds mentioned something about alien ships near the edge of the solar system, but Sam had more immediate concerns like meeting his production quotas and getting home in time for his daughter's soccer game. Teacher Amy Davis was conducting her usual afternoon class about human expansion into space. When one of her students asked about the alien ships everyone was talking about, she pulled up the live feed on the classroom display. The children watched the massive alien vessels for a few minutes before losing interest and returning to their lesson about planetary geology. Farmer Joe Mitchell was dealing with a broken irrigation system on his farm on New Kansas, one of humanity's most successful agricultural colonies. He had heard about some kind of alien ultimatum on the morning news, but his crops needed water regardless of whatever political drama was happening in space. Joe had survived 3 different alien contact situations, 2 economic crashes, and 1 particularly difficult winter, so a few more aliens making demands didn't seem worth changing his daily routine. Back on the Defiance, Admiral Sullivan was beginning to find the alien fleet's behavior genuinely puzzling. They had maintained their threatening formation for hours without actually doing anything threatening. Their communications had grown increasingly desperate, as if they were frustrated that their intimidation display wasn't having the desired. EFFEC Tactor Elena Vasquez, Earth's leading expert on alien psychology, had joined the ship via video link to observe the situation. She watched the alien fleet's maneuvers with growing fascination. "Admiral, I think we're seeing something unprecedented here," Dr. Vasquez said from her office at the University of Luna. "Every other species these beings have encountered has apparently responded to their intimidation tactics with fear or submission. They literally don't know what to do when their target audience remains unimpressed." Kate nodded thoughtfully. "It does seem like they're following some kind of script that assumes we'll panic and start begging for mercy. When we don't react the way they expect, they just keep repeating the same performance." The alien fleet's behavior became increasingly erratic as the day wore on. They moved closer to human ships, then backed away when the humans continued their normal activities. They broadcast the same threats multiple times, each repetition sounding slightly more uncertain than the last. They even tried new formations and weapon displays, apparently hoping to find the right combination that would finally scare the humans into compliance. Lieutenant Carter looked up from his station with barely contained amusement. "Admiral, they're asking us again if we understand the consequences of defying the Galaxy Council. This is the 10th time they've sent essentially the same message." "Tell them we heard them the first time," Kate replied. "And ask if they'd like to discuss trade agreements or cultural exchange programs while they're here." The response from the alien fleet was a long silence, followed by what sounded like heated arguments in several different alien languages. Finally, the lead ship transmitted a message that seemed much less confident than their earlier communications. "Human vessels, your failure to respond appropriately to Council authority is noted. This matter will be escalated to higher authorities. You have been warned." The 12 massive ships turned and accelerated away from human space, leaving the Defiance and its crew to continue their patrol in peace. Kate stood up and stretched, feeling like she had just witnessed something historically significant without being entirely sure what it was. Well, that was educational. "Then, file a report with Earth Command about our visitors. Make sure to note that they seemed more interested in looking scary than actually being scary." As news of the encounter spread through human space, the reaction was remarkably consistent across all colonies and settlements. Most people acknowledged that the alien ships had been impressive, but then returned to their regular activities with the kind of practical indifference that had carried humanity through countless previous crises. The Galaxy Council had just learned something that would have profound implications for the entire galactic order. Humans were remarkably difficult to intimidate. Not because they were particularly brave or foolish, but because they had spent their entire evolutionary history dealing with threats that were actually dangerous rather than merely theatrical. The emergency session of the Galaxy Council convened in their ancient chamber on the neutral world of Nexus Prime, where crystalline spires reached toward twin suns that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Vex Kohler stood before the assembled representatives of 12 species, each one more frustrated than the last with humanity's inexplicable behavior. "The intimidation protocols have failed completely," announced Vex Kohler, its crystalline form flickering with agitated energy patterns. "The humans observed our enforcement fleet for several hours, then asked if we wanted to discuss trade agreements. High Commander Zardek of the Zephyrian Empire, a massive reptilian being covered in metallic scales, slammed one clawed hand on the council table. This is intolerable. No species has ever simply ignored our authority. The humans must be taught. The same lesson we have taught 47 others. The other council members murmured agreement, though some seemed less certain than others. Diplomat Ironinlil of the Aquatic Consortium, whose translucent blue form rippled with concern, raised a tentative objection. Perhaps we should reconsider direct action. The humans have not actually attacked our forces or threatened our member worlds. They simply continue their expansion as if our warnings do not exist. Which is exactly the problem, Zardek responded. If word spreads that a species can ignore council directives without consequences, our entire system of order will collapse. Other worlds will begin questioning our authority. The debate continued for hours, but eventually reached the same conclusion that such debates always reached. The council would demonstrate their power through a measured application of force. They selected the human mining operation on the asteroid series as their target, reasoning that destroying an economic asset would force compliance without requiring the complete annihilation of a populated world. 3 days later, the Zephyrian battlecruiser Dominion arrived at Ceres with orders to eliminate the mining facility and its inhabitants. Commander Velcorix expected the operation to be completed within hours, after which the humans would surely see reason and accept council authority. What Commander Velcorix did not expect was Rick Hamilton. Rick had been running mining operations in dangerous locations for 23 years, starting with underwater drilling platforms in Earth's oceans, and eventually moving to asteroid mining when humanity reached the stars. He was a compact man with hands scarred by decades of working with heavy machinery, and he had survived equipment failures, space pirates, industrial accidents, and 3 different wives who had decided that married life with an asteroid miner was more adventure than they could handle. When the massive alien battlecruiser appeared on Ceres sensor screens, Rick was in the middle of fixing a broken ore processor with his chief engineer, Grace Foster. Grace was a tall woman with brilliant red hair who could repair any piece of equipment ever built by human hands, and several pieces that had been built by alien hands as well. "Boss, we've got company," called out Communications Officer Pete Davis from the Operations Center. "Big alien ship just dropped out of hyperspace and it's heading this way fast." Rick wiped his hands on a greasy rag and walked over to look at the sensor display. The approaching vessel was definitely impressive, easily 10 times larger than the biggest human ship he had ever seen. Its weapon systems were already powering up, which suggested that this was not a social visit. "Grace, how long until you get that ore processor working again?" Rick asked. "Give me another 20 minutes and it'll be running better than the day it was installed," Grace replied without looking up from her work. "Good, Pete. Send a message to that ship telling them we're busy and they'll have to wait their turn if they want to talk." Pete stared at his boss with obvious disbelief. "Rick, that thing has enough firepower to turn this entire asteroid into space dust. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But I've got quotas to meet and equipment to fix. If they want something, they can ask politely like civilized beings." The alien battlecruiser's response was to begin broadcasting demands for immediate surrender in several different languages. When that failed to produce results, they started using their weapons to destroy unmanned mining equipment on the asteroid's surface. Apparently hoping to demonstrate their seriousness, Rick watched the destruction with the calm expression of someone who had seen worse problems. "Well, that's annoying. Grace, any chance that ore processor could be modified to do something other than process ore?" Grace looked up from her work with a grin that Rick recognized as extremely dangerous. "Funny you should ask. I've been wondering. What would happen if we reversed the magnetic field generators and overloaded the particle accelerators? Would that be enough to get their attention? Rick, that ore processor moves around chunks of metal that weigh several tons each. If we modify it right, it could probably throw those chunks fast enough to cause some serious damage to anything that gets in the way." Rick nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like a plan. Pete, tell the boys to start loading the biggest chunks of processed titanium they can find into the ore processor. Looks like we're going to have ourselves a little disagreement with our visitors. The crew of Ceres mining station had worked together for years in an environment where small mistakes could kill everyone within minutes. They trusted each other completely and had developed the kind of practical problem-solving skills that came from being hundreds of millions of miles away from any possible help. When Rick explained what they were going to try, nobody questioned the plan or suggested alternatives. They just got to work. Commander Velcorix was becoming increasingly frustrated with the humans' failure to respond appropriately to his demonstration of superior firepower. The mining station should have surrendered immediately after witnessing the destruction of their surface equipment. Instead, they seemed to be ignoring him while continuing their industrial activities. The Zephyrian commander decided to move closer and use more targeted attacks to force a response. His battlecruiser approached the asteroid at what he considered a safe distance. While outside the range of any weapons the primitive humans might possess, that was when Grace Foster's modified or processor fired its first shot. The chunk of processed titanium, accelerated to nearly 10% of light speed by magnetic fields that had been designed to move massive amounts of material, struck the battlecruiser's forward shields with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The alien ship's defensive systems, designed to deflect energy weapons and conventional projectiles, were completely unprepared for a several-ton piece of metal traveling at relativistic speeds. The impact overloaded 3 shield generators and caused significant damage to the battlecruiser's forward weapons array. Emergency alarms blared throughout the alien ship as damage control teams scrambled to respond to what their sensors insisted was impossible. "Well, that worked better than expected," Grace commented as she watched the alien ship's lights flicker and dim. "Rick, I think we got their attention." Rick was already calculating angles and trajectories for the next shot. "Pete, ask them again if they'd like to discuss this situation politely. Mention that we've got plenty more chunks of titanium and Grace is getting better at aiming that thing." The response from Commander Velcorix was a barrage of plasma fire, directed at the mining station itself. However, the asteroid's natural rotation and the cover provided by mining equipment made targeting difficult, while Grace's improvised weapon continued to score hits on the battlecruiser with devastating effect. After 2 hours of increasingly desperate combat, the Zephyrian commander made the unprecedented decision to retreat. His battlecruiser, damaged and barely functional, limped away from Ceres with its crew wondering how a primitive mining operation had managed to defeat one of the Galaxy Council's most advanced warships. News of the Ceres incident spread through human space within hours, carried by the regular communication relays that connected all human settlements. The reaction was typically practical. If asteroid miners could fight off alien battlecruisers using modified industrial equipment, then clearly the Galaxy Council was not as dangerous as they wanted everyone to believe. More importantly, the news began to spread beyond human space through the underground networks that connected oppressed species throughout the galaxy. For the first time in thousands of years, someone had successfully resisted council enforcement and lived to tell about it. The news of what happened at Ceres traveled through the galaxy faster than anyone expected, carried by traders, smugglers, and the countless maintenance workers who kept interstellar communication networks running. Within 2 weeks, species that had never heard of humans were discussing the mining station that had defeated a Galaxy Council battlecruiser using nothing more than modified industrial equipment. On the trading world of Cagliari Prime, Ambassador Maria Santos was having the most productive diplomatic meetings of her career. She had originally been sent to establish basic trade relations with the Cagliari Confederation, a collection of peaceful merchant worlds that specialized in exotic materials and advanced manufacturing techniques. What she discovered instead was a species that had been quietly resenting Galaxy Council control for centuries. "Your people truly defeated a Zephyrian battlecruiser?" asked Trade Minister Yel Morin, his feathered crest rising with excitement. The Cagliari looked somewhat like large, intelligent birds with hands instead of wings, and their colorful plumage reflected their emotional states in ways that made diplomatic negotiations remarkably straightforward. according to the reports I received. Yes, Maria replied, though I think calling it a defeat might be overstating things. Our miners just convinced the aliens that attacking them was more trouble than it was worth. Minister Yelmoran's feathers shifted to a brilliant gold color that Maria had learned indicated extreme interest. For 800 years, the Council has demanded tribute from our worlds in exchange for protection we never needed. They take 30% of our rare mineral exports and forbid us from trading directly with species they have not approved. We always assumed we had no choice. But to comply, why did you think that? Maria asked, genuinely curious. Because no one had ever successfully resisted them before. The Council's power seemed absolute, backed by weapons and technology we could not match. But if humans can fight them using mining equipment, perhaps their power is not as absolute as they would have us believe? The Kaleri Confederation's decision to form a trade alliance with humanity was announced 3 days later, despite the Galaxy Council's explicit prohibition on unauthorized diplomatic agreements. For the first time in galactic history, a Council member species had openly defied their authority, and the precedent sent shockwaves throughout civilized space. Meanwhile, on the industrial world of Proxima Beta, human engineer Danny Brooks was working alongside alien technicians to solve a problem that had been bothering both species for months. The planet's massive manufacturing facilities produced high-tech components for starships, but the production process generated dangerous radiation that required expensive shielding and protective equipment. Danny had been brought in as part of a cultural exchange program to learn alien manufacturing techniques, but he quickly became more interested in the radiation problem. His background in Earth's nuclear power industry had given him experience with similar challenges, and he thought there might be a simpler solution than the elaborate containment systems the aliens were using. What if we don't try to contain the radiation at all? Danny suggested during a design meeting with his alien colleagues. What if we redirect it into something useful instead? Engineer Tokvalar, a member of the Insectoid Hive Collective, clicked his mandibles in a pattern that Danny had learned meant skepticism. The radiation cannot be redirected safely. We have tried many approaches over the centuries. But have you tried using it to power secondary manufacturing processes? On Earth, we learned to use nuclear waste as fuel for different types of reactors. Maybe we can do something similar here. The collaborative effort that followed produced innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. Human experience with dangerous industrial processes combined with alien precision engineering to create manufacturing systems that were not only safer but significantly more efficient. The new processes reduced production costs by 40%, while eliminating the radiation hazard completely. More importantly, the success of the human-alien collaboration demonstrated that species could work together without Galaxy Council oversight or approval. Word of the partnership spread quickly through underground networks, inspiring similar unauthorized cooperation between other species throughout the galaxy. Captain Alex Turner was having similar experiences aboard his merchant vessel, the Free Trader, as he established new trade routes that bypassed traditional council-controlled commerce. Alex had spent 10 years running cargo between human colonies, and he approached interstellar trade with the same practical attitude that characterized most human business dealings. Look, we've got industrial equipment, processed metals, and agricultural products, Alex explained to a delegation of representatives from 6 different species, who had requested a meeting at the neutral space station crossroads. You folks have things we need, rare minerals, advanced computer components, and those power cells that last twice as long as anything we can manufacture. Why don't we just trade directly and skip all the bureaucratic nonsense? The aliens around? The conference table exchanged glances that Alex had learned to recognize as the universal expression of beings who were considering something they knew they probably should not do. Finally, Administrator Gelthonis of the Aquatic Consortium spoke up. Direct trade between species requires Galaxy Council permits and oversight. The application process typically takes several years, and approval is not guaranteed. Right, but here's the thing, Alex replied. We're not asking for permits. We're just asking if you want to buy our stuff and sell us your stuff. The Galaxy Council doesn't have to know about it unless someone tells them, and why would anyone do that? The logic was simple enough that even species with radically different thought processes could understand it. Within a month, Alex's informal trade network included 17 different worlds and was generating enough profit to fund the construction of 6 new human merchant vessels. The Galaxy Council's economic control began to weaken as more species discovered that they could trade directly with each other without going through official channels. The rigid systems that had maintained order for millennia started to develop cracks as beings realized that Council authority depended entirely on voluntary compliance. Dr. Helen Chang was documenting these changes from her research station on Europa, where she had been studying galactic political structures as part of her work in xenopolitical science. Her analysis of the Council's power base revealed something that surprised even her. The entire galactic order was essentially a protection racket that worked only because everyone believed it was necessary. The Galaxy Council doesn't actually control anything, Helen explained during a video conference with Earth's diplomatic corps. They've convinced everyone that their authority is legitimate, but when you examine their actual capabilities, they're just another government with limited resources and serious organizational problems. Her research showed that the Council's enforcement fleet consisted of only a few hundred ships spread across thousands of star systems. Their economic power came from trade monopolies that existed only because other species had agreed to honor them. Their political authority rested on treaties that had been signed under duress and could be withdrawn at any time. The really interesting thing is that other species are starting to figure this out, Helen continued. The Kalari Confederation's trade agreement with us has inspired at least 6 other worlds to declare independence from Council oversight. The Hive Collective is openly questioning tribute requirements. Even some of the Council's own member species are beginning to ask why they're paying for protection they don't need. Commander Nick Taylor was observing these political changes from a more practical perspective as he led human exploration missions into regions of space that the Galaxy Council had declared off-limits. His ship, the Pioneer, was conducting standard survey operations in the restricted Vega sector when he encountered something unexpected, a Council patrol that seemed almost apologetic about enforcing their own regulations. "Human vessel, you are operating in restricted space," came the transmission from the alien patrol ship. "Please state your authorization for entering this sector." "We don't have any authorization," Nick replied honestly. "We're just exploring and mapping stellar phenomena. Is there some kind of problem with that?" The response took several minutes, during which Nick could hear what sounded like heated discussions in the background. Finally, the alien commander came back on the communication channel. "Human vessel, your presence in this sector is technically unauthorized, but no immediate action will be taken. Please be advised that continued operations in restricted space may result in future complications." Nick found the encounter puzzling until he realized what was happening. The Galaxy Council's enforcement personnel were starting to have doubts about their own authority. When faced with humans who simply ignored restrictions without being aggressive or threatening, the aliens were discovering that they didn't actually want to start fights over empty space and arbitrary boundaries, the cumulative effect of all. These small acts of independence was beginning to reshape the entire galactic political landscape. Species that had accepted Council authority for centuries were starting to quest. 6 months after the Galaxy Council had first contacted humanity with their demands, Ambassador Claire Rodriguez received another transmission marked with the Golden Seal. This time, however, the tone was very different from the imperious ultimatum she had received at the beginning of this diplomatic crisis. The holographic projector activated to reveal Vex Kolar once again, but the crystalline being's appearance had changed significantly. Its faceted surfaces looked dimmer than before, and its voice carried none of the absolute confidence that had characterized their first meeting. "Ambassador Rodriguez, I am contacting you on behalf of what remains of the Galaxy Council to request a diplomatic meeting," Vex Kolar said, and Claire noted that this was the first time any Council representative had used her actual title. Recent developments have created a situation that requires discussion between our peoples. Claire kept her expression neutral, though she was privately amused by the change in attitude. I'm always happy to discuss diplomatic matters. What kind of developments are you referring to? The crystalline being's form flickered with what Claire had learned to recognize as embarrassment. 7 member species have withdrawn from the Council in the past month. 12 more have declared their intention to establish independent trade relationships outside of Council oversight. Our enforcement capabilities have been reduced by 60% due to crew defections and equipment failures. That does sound like a challenging situation, Claire replied diplomatically. How can humanity help? We would like to propose a mutual cooperation agreement between the remaining Council members and your species. We believe that our combined resources could benefit all parties involved. Claire found herself in the unusual position of receiving a proposal from beings who had recently been threatening to destroy human civilization. I'll certainly discuss this with President Morrison and our diplomatic corps. Would you like to send a delegation to meet in person? That would be acceptable. We will dispatch representatives to a neutral location of your choosing. 2 weeks later, Claire found herself in a conference room aboard the space station Harmony, which had been hastily constructed in neutral space specifically for this meeting. The human delegation included President Morrison, Defense Secretary Lisa Park, and trade negotiator Paul Henderson, who had been brought in to handle the economic aspects of whatever agreement might emerge. The Council delegation was smaller than expected and notably less impressive than their previous representatives. Vex Kohler led the group, accompanied by only 3 other beings, representing what remained of the galactic government that had once claimed dominion over thousands of worlds. President Morrison opened the meeting with characteristic directness. Before we discuss any agreements, I'd like to understand what exactly we're negotiating with. How much authority does the current council actually have? Vexcola's crystalline form dimmed further. The council currently maintains direct authority over 4 star systems and indirect influence over perhaps a dozen others. Our enforcement fleet consists of 37 functional vessels, though crew reliability has become an ongoing concern. Trade negotiator Henderson looked up from his notes with obvious surprise. 37 ships? Our intelligence suggested you had hundreds of vessels and controlled thousands of systems. Those reports were accurate 6 months ago, admitted Council Representative Morthaken, a tall being whose metallic skin reflected the room's lighting in shifting patterns. However, our authority depended upon voluntary compliance from member species. When humanity demonstrated that Council directives could be ignored without consequences, other species began questioning the necessity of our oversight. Defense Secretary Park leaned forward with interest. Are you saying that your entire galactic government was essentially voluntary? In practical terms, yes. The Council maintained order through a combination of economic incentives, security, guarantees, and the threat of sanctions. When species discovered they could achieve better economic results through direct trade and handle their own security concerns, our relevance diminished rapidly. President Morrison nodded thoughtfully. So what exactly are you proposing? Do you want us to help you rebuild your authority over the galaxy? Vexcola's response surprised everyone in the room. No, Mr. President, we are proposing the formation of a new organization based on voluntary participation and mutual benefit rather than hierarchical control. The Galactic Commerce Federation would focus on facilitating trade, sharing scientific knowledge, and coordinating exploration efforts. Paul Henderson spent the next hour working through the practical details of what such an organization might look like. The proposed federation would have no enforcement powers, no tribute requirements, and no restrictions on member species' internal affairs or expansion activities. Instead, it would provide standardized trading protocols, joint research initiatives, and shared navigation data for species that chose to participate. This is essentially the kind of organization we would have proposed ourselves, Henderson admitted. Voluntary cooperation between equals rather than a hierarchy based on threats and intimidation. The negotiations continued for 3 days, but The final agreement was remarkably straightforward. The Galactic Commerce Federation would be established with Earth as one of 7 founding members, including the remaining council species and several worlds that had recently declared independence. Any species could join by simply agreeing to the basic principles of peaceful trade and mutual respect. 6 months later, Captain Susan Wallace stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel, New Horizons, as it prepared to depart for the previously unexplored Andromeda Spiral. Her crew included humans, Kaleri, members of the Hive Collective, and 3 other species, all working together on humanity's most ambitious space exploration project to date. "All stations report ready for departure," announced Navigator Amy Chun from her position at the helm. The ship's chief engineer, a Kaleri named Yulkessen, confirmed that the hybrid propulsion system was operating at peak efficiency. Susan looked around at her mixed-species crew with satisfaction. The New Horizons represented everything that the old Galaxy Council had tried to prevent. Independent species working together without oversight, exploring space without permits, and making decisions based on curiosity and mutual benefit rather than fear and bureaucratic approval. "Take us out, Amy. Let's go see what's out there." As the New Horizons accelerated toward unknown space, its departure was monitored by observation stations throughout the galaxy. The ship carried representatives from 17 different species, along with enough supplies and equipment to establish humanity's first permanent research station outside the local galactic cluster, back on Earth. Life had returned to its normal rhythm of steady expansion and practical problem-solving. The Galaxy Council crisis was already becoming history, remembered more as an interesting diplomatic challenge than as a serious threat to human civilization. Dr. Elena Vasquez published her final report on the psychological aspects of the Council encounter, concluding that humanity's greatest advantage had been their complete lack of impressed reaction to threats that previous species had found overwhelming. Her research suggested that humans had evolved in an environment where survival depended on adapting to challenges rather than submitting to authority, making them uniquely resistant to intimidation-based governance. Factory worker Sam Cooper finished building the colonial transport ship that would carry the next wave of settlers to the Kepler system. Teacher Amy Davis continued educating her students about the expanding frontier of human space, now including lessons about their new alien partners and the collaborative projects that were opening up previously unimaginable possibilities. Farmer Joe Mitchell harvested another successful crop on New Kansas, supplying food for colonies that were no longer restricted by arbitrary council regulations about where humans could and could not establish settlements. Admiral Kate Sullivan received reports from patrol ships throughout human space, noting that the galaxy had become a much more interesting place now that species were free to interact without bureaucratic interference. Trade was flourishing, scientific collaboration was producing remarkable innovations, and exploration was proceeding at a pace that would have been impossible under the old system. The final irony of the Galaxy Council crisis was that it had ended, not with humanity conquering their would-be oppressors, but with the simple demonstration that oppression was unnecessary. By refusing to be intimidated, humans had accidentally liberated an entire galaxy from a system of control that had only worked because everyone believed it was inevitable. The children who played together on space stations throughout human space, representing dozens of different species, would grow up in a galaxy where cooperation was normal and authority had to be earned rather than demanded. They would never know what it was like to live under the kind of fear-based system that had dominated galactic politics for thousands of years, and if they ever encountered similar threats in the future, they would respond with the same practical indifference that had served their parents so well. They would politely decline to be impressed and continue going about their business as if bullies were just another minor inconvenience to be